Alexander Selkirk, born Alexander Selkirk in 1675, was a British privateer who went to sea in 1703 as the master of the Cinque Ports. The purpose of his trip was to seize Spanish and Portuguese ships, but because he did not like the way the captain was navigating his ship, he demanded to be put ashore on the Masatira Islands in the Juan Fernandez archipelago. He hoped that the Cinque Ports would stop by for food and water and rescue him. The only mammals found on the islands were goats, cats, and rats, which were placed by predecessors. Selkirk was rescued in 1709 and went back to England. He did not adapt to the life in England and went back in 1720 and died from fever a year later off the coast of Africa. Selkirk is considered the real-life Robinson Crusoe. The Juan Fernandez Archipelago, famous for its isolation, is made up of 4 small islands 400 miles off the coast of Chile and South America. Today, 3 of the islands are considered a living museum known for its exotic and endemic species, which are not found anywhere else in the world. 5 species of birds, 126 species of plants, and a lot of insects. It does not include any native species of amphibians, reptiles, or mammals, and the only ones that are found are there because they were introduced previously by other predecessors. Many years after Selkirk, Charles Darwin went to sea on the HMS Beagle. He noticed a lot of changes within the different places he traveled to. He noticed a pattern in the distribution of species. He questioned these changes. For instance, why were there unbalanced floras and faunas in oceanic islands compared to continental islands? Why are there marsupial mammals only in Australia, but placental mammals are all over the globe? Why do we have similar species in distant lands? Darwin realized that evolution had a major role in the distribution of these species, but to further understand, we have to wait for the rest of the chapter. Ancient beliefs of biogeography upheld the idea of creationism and denied evolution. People believed that it was by the pairs Noah had made during the flood, which were later distributed when landing on Mount Ararat. We even had some scientists believe species were placed at their site of creation, one of which a zoologist by the name of Louis Agassiz stated. Not only were species immutable and static, but so were their distributions, with which each remaining at or near their site of creation. Further developments disproved this idea. Some of the evolutionary evidence disproving creationist ideas are found throughout the chapter, one of which were the seashell fossils found by Darwin in the Andes Mountains on his Beagle voyage. Darwin realized that these mountains must have been at one time underwater. These fossil findings were just one of the many found evidences that show how the changes in the earth are a cause to the distribution of species. Darwin argued this idea by stating that distribution of species were explained not by creation, but by evolution. He realized that plants and animals moving to distant lands with changes in the earth was the cause to the evolutionary changes that were taking place, and is what explains the massive distribution and similarities in species. However, his ideas did not explain how species got to their destination. Another scientist also mentioned in the chapter, by the name of Charles Lyell, who was a friend and mentor of Charles Darwin, stated that not only is the world very old, but it is also going through constant change. This helped Darwin's ideas come forth as well. Today we have many of the answers to the unanswered questions that Darwin had left, thanks to the many newfound developments in biology. 2 major developments, continental drift and molecular taxonomy, help us understand these unanswered questions. Very large continents separating, shifting, and joining to form the continents we have today have created a continental drift. With molecular taxonomy, we can see the time species evolved. Molecular clock shows the evolutionary time and divergence within species. how they have evolved from their common ancestors. And we can see the differences and changes made within generations of species. We can also see distribution in succulents happening in the deserts of different continents in the world. In the deserts of North and South America, succulents belong to the cactus family. In cacti, the sap is clear and watery. However, in the deserts of Asia, Australia, and Africa, the succulents are part of the euphorb family, in which their sap is bitter, milky, and white. In the 1800s, the North American prickly pear was introduced to Australia. The prickly pear had a certain cochineal beetle which gave off a red dye once extracted. This red dye was used for Persian rugs and certain other things. Unfortunately, the prickly pear was destroying the earth and growing very quickly, so they had to find a way to stop it from spreading. In order to do that, they introduced a type of moth. The moth was called Cactoblastus. It was introduced to the cacti in order to devour it, and that put an end to the rapid growth. It was successful, and it was done in 1926, which is one of the successful biological controls seen. From left to right, we can see the cacti, euphorbs, and a Cactoblastus moth.
Species living in a similar environment behave alike, even if they are not related. However, they are still differentiable by the key differences that shows they are not from a common ancestor. For example, camouflaging white coloration shared by different animals, like polar bears and snowy owls. Convergent evolution has three factors. Common ancestry, which we can explain it by explaining Australian marsupials share some features such as females that have two vaginas and a double uterus, while placental mammals share different features, a long-lasting placenta. The next factor is speciation, which common ancestors give rise to many descendants. And last but not least, we have natural selection, which we can explain as species are well adapted to their own environment. This picture shows placental mammals and the difference with Australian marsupials. This explains how convergent evolution may have similar habitats, but in different areas of the world. Fossils of early marsupials were found in North America. The fossils were about 80 million years old. As they evolved, they spread towards South America about 40 million years ago. In Australia, they became diversifying into the 200-odd species that are still living in Australia to this day. The reason why marsupials were spread all the way to Australia is because during that lifetime, Australia and South America were joined. The tip of South America was connected to what is now Antarctica, which was connected to what is now called Australia. Another factor that strongly supports evolution is the fact that species living in one area should be the descendants of earlier species that lived in the same place. Darwin's hypothesis in The Descent of Man in 1871 that humans evolved in Africa supports the theory that fossils of ancestors and descendants can be found in the same place. Darwin's hypothesis was mainly explaining where humans evolved from. At the time he made this hypothesis, there were no fossils of humans found. However, when the first human fossils were found 50 years later, it was still found in Africa, which proved Darwin's hypothesis. Glossopteris was one of the dominant plants of the Permian flora. They were a type of conifers that had tongue-shaped leaves instead of needle-shaped leaves. Glossopteris fossils were found across the southern continents. How would we explain the fact they were found in southern continents if we know that they had large, heavy seeds that couldn't float? We can explain this by making sense and learning that the sketches were now pointing all away from the center of Antarctica, which happens to be part of Gondwana. They passed over South Pole during the Permian. Snow could have produced extensive glaciers spreading away. This makes sense when we realize where present-day southern continents really were during last Permian. The continental islands were once connected to a continent, but later spreaded by a sea level that floated former bridges or by moving continental plates. Oceanic islands are those that were never connected to a continent. They arose from the sea floor, initially brought of life. The picture below shows the step-by-step of how they become floated from sea level. Another major proof of evolution is the species on islands. Mammals, amphibians, and reptiles can do very well when humans introduce them to oceanic islands. Pigs and goats have ovarium on Hawaii, making meals of native plants. The following pictures show the different types of mammals, reptiles, and amphibians.
Oceanic islands lack many basic types of animals. The types that are found there are in abundance and are very similar to each other. An example will be the birds in the Galapagos Islands. Here we have 13 islands that habitat about 28 species of birds. They are found nowhere else in the world. Among the 28 species, 14 of them are very closely related. An example would be the famous Galapagos finches. In this slide, we have a picture of the beautiful Galapagos Islands. No other continent in the world is so heavily dominated by finches. The carpenter finch is one of the rare species that uses its special skills to pry insects from trees. They are very similar to woodpeckers. However, the Galapagos Islands, they lack woodpeckers. In this picture, we have the carpenter finch, that is the most famous finch that is found at the Galapagos Islands. Next, we are moving on to the Hawaiian Islands. Hawaii, just like the Galapagos Islands, is home to many spectacular birds. The main birds that are found here are the honey creepers. They made up nearly half of the bird fauna. They arrived on the islands about 4 million years ago. Unfortunately today, only 20 species of honey creepers remain. In this picture, we could see the beautiful Hawaiian honey creeper, one of the 20 species of honey creepers left in Hawaii today. The oceanic islands are home to a plethora of plants and insects. St. Helena is home to many species of small flightless beetles. The most popular would be the wood weevils, which is a big species of flightless beetles in this region. The main species that are found on oceanic islands would include native plants, birds, and insects. These species can colonize on oceanic islands through long-distance dispersal. Birds, they are capable of flying long distances to oceanic islands. They carry with them their own eggs and seeds of plants they've eaten. Parasites also come with them on their feathers, and small organisms that are stuck to the mud on their feet. Plants also move to oceanic islands as seeds carried across the sea. Also, they get there through the birds of feathers and also wind. Since insects can also fly, they'll also be taken to oceanic islands through the process of flying or by the wind. The reason that some species are missing on oceanic islands would be because it's hard for them to migrate to oceanic islands. They would consist of land mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and freshwater fish. It is harder for these animals and heavy reptiles to cross an expanse of seawater, so they are very rare on islands. Those that are either have been brought there or survived on a carrier and were carried to the islands. One last observation that we can see is that those species of plants and animals found on islands are the most similar to species found on the nearest mainland. The Galapagos Islands, as an example, species being closest to the west coast of South America. Oceanic islands have characteristics that distinguish them from either continents or continental islands.